The rain fell like tears from heaven that night, each droplet carrying the weight of broken vows and shattered trust. Jessica stood at her penthouse window, watching a figure hunched beneath the amber glow of the street light below. 2 weeks had passed since she'd had his belongings removed from their Westchester home and the locks changed. And there he sat, David Harper, the man who had carved out her heart with surgical precision and fed it to his own ambition. His expensive suit, the one she'd bought him for their 10th anniversary, was now soaked through. His perfectly styled hair hung limp against his skull. He looked pathetic, desperate, broken. Everything he had once called her behind closed doors. But this wasn't the end of her story. This was merely the crescendo of a symphony of revenge that had been playing since the moment she heard him laugh at her expense in that restaurant 2 weeks ago. The moment she discovered that 12 years of marriage for David Harper was nothing more than a business arrangement masquerading as love. And she had just collected the final payment. Her name was Jessica Harper, and until 2 weeks ago, she believed she was living the perfect life. The kind where hard work and dedication were rewarded with lasting love. Where partnership meant more than just sharing a mortgage. Where happily ever after wasn't just a myth sold in romance novels. She should have known better. After all, she was a lawyer. Facts don't lie. People do. It started on a Thursday evening in October. The autumn air had that crisp bite that made you want to curl up with someone you loved, share a bottle of wine, and celebrate another year of building something beautiful together. She had been planning their anniversary dinner for weeks. Reservations at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where David had proposed 4 years into their relationship, where they'd celebrated every major milestone since. She was standing in front of their bedroom mirror, adjusting the black dress that hugged her curves just right. The dress David had chosen for her during one of their rare shopping trips together in the early years. "You look stunning in black," he'd said, his hands sliding around her waist. "It brings out the strength in your eyes." Those same eyes now stared back at her from the mirror, bright with anticipation. She had news to share with David tonight. Good news. The managing partnership at Whitman, Sterling and Associates had finally been offered to her, along with a substantial equity stake. They could finally renovate the house the way they'd always talked about. Maybe even start seriously trying for the family they'd been putting off for career reasons. The future stretched before them like a golden highway. Her phone buzzed against the dresser. David's name lit up the screen, accompanied by the photo she'd taken of him last summer at the Hamptons house. His perfect smile, his confident posture, his eyes that seemed to hold all the warmth and promise of their shared dreams. "Hey, beautiful." His voice was smooth as honey through the speaker. "Hey yourself, handsome. I'm just finishing up here. Should I meet you at the restaurant?" "Actually, Jess, that's why I'm calling." There was something different in his tone, a hesitation that made her stomach flutter with unease. "I have to cancel tonight." The lipstick she'd been applying slipped from her fingers, clattering to the hardwood floor. "Cancel? David, we've had these reservations for months. It's our anniversary." I know, and I'm sorry, sweetheart. Really, but there's a crisis at work. The Morrison account is imploding, and if I don't handle this personally, I could lose everything I've worked for with this promotion." She bent to retrieve the lipstick, her heart sinking. "Can't someone else handle it? Just this once?" "No." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. She could hear him catch himself, soften his voice. "No, babe. This is make or break time for me. You understand, right? You know how important this is for our future." She stared at her reflection, noting how the excitement had drained from her features. "Of course. Your career comes first. You're incredible, Jess. This is why I married you. You get it. I'll make it up to you this weekend, okay? We'll go somewhere special. Just the two of us." After they hung up, she sat on the edge of their bed for a long moment, still wearing the black dress that suddenly felt too formal, too hopeful. Something gnawed at the edges of her consciousness, a tiny voice whispering that David had been distant lately, that his kisses had felt perfunctory, that he'd been more interested in her salary than her stories from work. But she silenced that voice. Marriage meant trust. Marriage meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Marriage, she was about to learn, could also mean being played for a fool. She should have stayed home, should have ordered Thai food, opened a bottle of wine, and caught up on briefs while nursing her disappointment. Instead, she found herself walking down Madison Avenue 40 minutes later, still wearing that black dress, but now with a dark coat pulled over it and a silk scarf casting shadows across her face. She told herself she was just going for a walk, just clearing her head. The fact that she was walking in the direction of Le Bernardin was pure coincidence. The restaurant glowed like a warm beacon against the cold October night. Through the large windows, she could see couples leaning across candlelit tables, sharing intimate conversations and stolen glances. The life she thought she was living just hours ago. She was about to turn away when she saw them. David sat at a corner table, his back to the window, but she would recognize those broad shoulders anywhere. The way he unconsciously straightened his tie when he was trying to impress someone. Across from him sat a woman with flowing blonde hair and a laugh that seemed to light up the entire restaurant. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. Beside them, like living proof of her worst nightmare, sat Margie and Robert Harper, David's parents. The people who had welcomed her into their family with open arms 12 years ago, who had made her the daughter they'd never had, who had supported her through law school and celebrated every promotion with genuine pride. The same people who were now beaming at the blonde woman like she was their greatest treasure. She found herself moving closer, drawn by a sick fascination she couldn't resist. There was a small table near the window, partially hidden by an elegant pillar. She slipped into the chair with her back to them, pulled her scarf lower, and pretended to study the menu while her entire world crumbled around her. "Sarah, darling." Margie Harper's voice was warm with affection. "You look absolutely radiant." "Doesn't she look radiant, Robert?" "Beautiful as ever," David's father agreed. "We're so glad you two worked things out." Sarah. The name hit her like a physical blow. She knew that name. David had mentioned her in passing during their early relationship. His college girlfriend, the one who had moved to Seattle for her career, the one who got away. "I never should have left." Sarah's voice was soft, musical. Everything Jessica's professional voice wasn't. "These past 3 years have been miserable without David. When I got the job offer here in New York, I knew it was fate giving us a second chance." She watched through her peripheral vision as David reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with Sarah's. The same fingers that had slipped the wedding ring onto her hand 12 years ago, that had signed their mortgage papers, their joint tax returns, their living will. "I never stopped loving you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for a single day." The words were a knife twisting in her chest. Not for a single day. What about the 12 years he'd spent with her? What about the vows he'd whispered against her neck on their wedding night? The dreams they'd shared, the life they'd built together? What about Jessica? Margie asked suddenly. Her heart stopped. Her own name sounded foreign in that context, like they were discussing a stranger rather than the woman who had been David's wife for over a decade. David's laugh was cold, cruel, a sound she'd never heard from him before. "That marriage was never real," he said, his voice casual, conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "It's been a business arrangement from the start." The menu slipped from her numb fingers. She felt like she was drowning, like the air in the restaurant had turned to water, and she was sinking deeper with every word. "Jessica's brilliant, don't get me wrong," David continued, his voice gaining confidence as he warmed to his subject. "Managing partner at one of the city's most prestigious firms, incredible earning potential. But we both knew from the beginning that it was a strategic alliance more than anything else. She gets the social respectability of marriage, I get the financial security. It works for both of us." "But you two seem so happy together," Robert said, and she could hear the confusion in his voice. "At family gatherings, holidays. Jessica's a consummate professional," David said with what sounded like grudging respect. "She plays her part perfectly, but there's no real connection there, no passion. How could there be? She's married to her career, and I'm just convenient." "When are you going to tell her about us?" Sarah asked, and she could hear the slight discomfort in her voice. At least someone at that table had a conscience. After the equity partnership announcement, David said without hesitation, "Once that's locked in and I've got my promotion secured, I'll explain the situation to her. She's practical above all else. She'll understand that we both got what we needed from the arrangement, and now it's time to move on." "But David," Margie said, her voice gentle but concerned, "Jessica loves you. I've seen the way she looks at you, the way she talks about your future together." "She loves the idea of me," David corrected. "She loves the stability, the social status, the perfect life we've built on paper. But she doesn't know the real me. You do, Sarah? You've always seen who I really am." Their laughter echoed around her like the sound of breaking glass. 3 people she had trusted, had loved, had welcomed into her heart. Laughing at her expense, laughing at her love, her devotion, her stupidity. She sat there for another 10 minutes, listening to them plan their future together. The future that was being built on the foundation of her demolished marriage and destroyed trust. They talked about the apartment they wanted to buy together, the wedding they hoped to have next spring once David's arrangement with her was officially dissolved, the children they wanted to raise. Not once did David's voice waver with guilt. Not once did he seem to remember that somewhere across town, his wife was waiting for him to call and apologize for missing their anniversary dinner. When she finally stood up, her legs shaking beneath her, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the restaurant window. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, hollow-eyed, broken, pathetic. Everything David apparently saw when he looked at her. But as she walked away from that restaurant, as she left behind the laughter and the lies and the life she thought she'd been living, something crystallized inside her. The pain was still there, sharp and immediate. But beneath it was something else, something harder, colder, something that tasted like justice. She didn't remember the ride home. One moment she was standing outside Le Bernardin, watching her entire world collapse through a window, and the next she was fumbling with the keys to their house in Westchester. Her hands shaking so violently she could barely get them in the lock. The house felt different as she stepped inside. The same furniture, the same wedding photos scattered across every surface, the same throw pillows David had insisted on buying for their anniversary last year. But now it all felt contaminated, poisoned by the truth she'd just witnessed. She walked through the rooms like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. The expensive watch on his nightstand, the one he'd claimed was a bonus from work, but which she now realized she'd probably paid for indirectly through their joint accounts. The designer clothes hanging in their shared closet, clothes she'd encouraged him to buy during their shopping trips, telling herself that supporting his confidence was just another way of being a good wife. The laptop on their kitchen counter, the one he used for his marketing work. Work that had apparently given him plenty of time to maintain a relationship with Sarah while keeping Jessica in the dark about his true feelings. She found evidence of their life together everywhere, like a cancer that had spread through her existence, claiming territory she hadn't even realized she'd surrendered. His coffee cups in the sink, his shoes by the door, his books on their shelves. 12 years of systematic deception disguised as marriage. The anger came in waves. First, the hot, immediate rage that made her want to scream, to throw things, to call him and unleash every legal threat she'd ever learned. Then the cold, calculating fury that whispered about justice, about consequences, about making him pay for every lie he'd told and every year he'd stolen. But beneath both types of anger was something far worse. Shame. The crushing, suffocating shame of having been so thoroughly fooled. Of having been so desperate for love that she'd ignored every red flag, explained away every inconsistency, made excuses for every cold gesture or dismissive comment. She was a successful attorney, a managing partner at a prestigious firm, and someone respected throughout the New York legal community. But when it came to David Harper, she'd been nothing more than a business arrangement with feelings, a strategic alliance to be managed, a fool to be placated. That's when the plan began to form. She started with his belongings. Not everything. That would be too obvious, too emotional. Instead, she focused on the items that represented their supposed partnership. The wedding ring he'd left on the nightstand. The anniversary gifts she'd given him over the years. The photos of their vacations, their celebrations, their carefully constructed life together. She gathered them methodically, efficiently, the same way she approached complex legal cases. No emotion, no hesitation, just cold, professional execution. But unlike Melinda's dramatic gesture of throwing belongings onto the street, Jessica's approach was more strategic. She packed everything neatly in boxes, labeled them with David's name, and arranged for a courier service to deliver them to his office first thing Monday morning. Let his colleagues at the marketing firm see exactly what a man's life looked like when his 12-year business arrangement came to an end. The rain had started by the time she finished, but she felt oddly calm. Somewhere across the city, David was probably still at dinner with Sarah and his parents, planning their future while assuming Jessica was safe at home, waiting for his return like a good, practical wife. But now there were consequences coming. Now there was a reckoning he couldn't charm his way out of. She went upstairs to her home office and opened her laptop. David thought she was just a convenient business arrangement. Then it was time to show him exactly how inconvenient this arrangement could become. Being a corporate attorney had its advantages, especially when your specialty was forensic analysis of business partnerships gone wrong. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But as she sat in her office that night, surrounded by financial records and joint tax returns, she discovered that revenge was actually best served with meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of matrimonial law. She started with their joint accounts. As an equity partner in a major law firm, she had always been the primary breadwinner in their marriage. David's marketing salary was respectable, but her income was easily triple his. Over the years, she'd noticed occasional discrepancies in their statements, small amounts, never enough to trigger concern, but frequent enough to add up to significant money. Money that had funded his double life, his real relationship, his true priorities. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she documented everything. Screenshots, printed records, detailed spreadsheets breaking down every suspicious transaction. She'd prosecuted corporate embezzlement cases with less evidence than what David had handed her on a silver platter. But the financial analysis was just the beginning. She dug deeper into his digital footprint, their shared computer, his email accounts that she'd had access to for years for practical reasons, his social media profiles. All of it revealing the true scope of his deception. The emails with Sarah went back 2 years. 2 years of planning their reunion, of coordinating his management of Jessica's expectations, of laughing about the naive wife who was financing their love affair without knowing it. There were detailed discussions about which assets they wanted to keep when David moved out, mockery of her dedication to work, and strategic advice about how to maximize his position in the inevitable divorce proceedings. But the most damning evidence was in his text messages with his college roommate, Brad Morrison, a divorce attorney who apparently served as David's advisor in the fine art of matrimonial manipulation. Brad, how's Operation Exit Strategy going? David, perfectly. Jessica suspects nothing. Just got her to agree to putting the house entirely in both our names for tax purposes. Brad, classic move. And the timeline? David, Sarah's settled in her new job. I figure 6 more months to secure my promotion and build up the case that our marriage was always more business than personal. Brad, the parents are on board. David, they love Sarah. Always have. They're happy I'm finally admitting what they've known all along, that Jessica and I were never really compatible. Brad, and Jessica's buying the Happy Marriage Act. David, she's so focused on work, she barely notices I exist half the time. Perfect wife for a strategic arrangement. Brad, you're going to break her heart. David, she'll be fine. She's practical above all else. Plus, she keeps the house and I don't ask for alimony. She'll probably thank me for not wasting more of her time. She'll probably thank me. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of her love, devotion, and unwavering support, reduced to a waste of time that he expected her to be grateful to escape. She stared at the screen for a long time after she finished reading, feeling something shift inside her chest. The grief and shame were still there, but they were being consumed by something far more powerful, something that sounded like thunder and tasted like justice. David Harper had made a critical error. He'd assumed that his convenient business arrangement was just another trusting wife who would accept whatever narrative he provided and fade gracefully into the background. He'd never considered that his business arrangement might be smarter than him, more connected than him, and infinitely more dangerous than him when properly motivated. It was time to teach him that lesson. Friday morning brought crisp autumn sunshine and a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She dressed carefully, her best black suit, the one that made her look exactly like what she was, a woman who could destroy someone's life with a few well-placed legal maneuvers. Her first stop was the office, where she found her partner Rachel Morrison already at her desk, reviewing case files with the focused intensity that had made her the most feared divorce attorney in Manhattan. Rachel looked up as Jessica entered, her sharp eyes immediately noting her expression. "You look like someone who's about to ruin somebody's decade," she observed with professional approval. "Please tell me it involves that husband of yours who I've never trusted." Rachel had never liked David. From the moment Jessica had introduced them at a firm function, she'd watched him with the same expression she reserved for opposing counsel who tried to hide assets during discovery proceedings, suspicious, calculating, and utterly unimpressed by his charm. It involves a lot more than ruining his decade, Jessica said, settling into the chair across from Rachel's desk. I need a favor, and it's going to require your special talents. Rachel Morrison was more than just Jessica's partner. Before joining the firm, she'd spent 15 years specializing in high-conflict divorce cases involving substantial assets and complex financial arrangements. She had connections throughout the legal community, relationships with the best private investigators in the city, and absolutely no tolerance for men who played games with marriage. Tell me everything, Rachel said, leaning back in her chair with the satisfied smile of a predator who'd just spotted wounded prey. Jessica laid it all out. The anniversary dinner deception, the conversation she'd overheard, the systematic emotional fraud disguised as marriage. She showed Rachel the emails, the text messages, the detailed financial records of David's planning. By the time she finished, Rachel's expression had gone from interested to professionally outraged. This bastard has been running a 12-year con on you, she said, scrolling through the evidence on Jessica's laptop. And he's been stupid enough to document his entire strategy in writing. What are my options? Jessica asked. Everything legal, Rachel said grimly. And a few things that are technically legal but morally devastating. While Rachel worked her magic, Jessica made her own calls. First to Marcus Webb, a private investigator who specialized in matrimonial cases and had worked with their firm for years. Marcus was a former NYPD detective who understood that the most effective investigations were the ones that revealed not just what someone had done, but who they really were beneath the surface. I need a complete profile on Sarah Mitchell, she told him. Employment history, previous relationships, financial records, social media presence. Everything that might explain why she's willing to be the other woman in a 12-year marriage. Her next call was to Janet Liu, the forensic accountant who had helped their firm trace hidden assets in some of the city's most complex divorce cases. Janet, I need you to analyze 12 years of joint financial records. I want to know every penny that's been spent on someone other than the two people whose names are on the accounts. By the time she hung up with Janet, she was feeling more like herself than she had in years. This was what she was good at. Investigation, strategy, systematic problem solving. David had mistaken her dedication to their marriage for weakness, her love for gullibility. He was about to learn the difference between a victim and a very angry attorney with resources. Rachel appeared in her doorway as she was finishing her notes. Your husband is officially fucked, she announced with satisfaction. I just got off the phone with 3 different private investigators who've worked matrimonial cases involving Sarah Mitchell. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? She's done this before. Twice. Same pattern. Targets married men in their late 30s or early 40s, men with substantial assets and stable careers. She positions herself as the lost love who represents what their marriage lacks, then helps them plan strategic divorces that maximize their financial position. The revelation hit Jessica like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't just David's college girlfriend seeking a romantic reunion. She was a professional homewrecker who had turned relationship disruption into a business model. The first case was in Chicago 5 years ago, Rachel continued. Investment banker, married 15 years, 2 kids. Sarah convinced him his marriage was holding him back professionally. Helped him hide assets for 18 months before he filed for divorce. The wife got destroyed in court because she trusted her husband right up until the end. And the second case? Boston, 2 years ago. Corporate lawyer, married 12 years. Similar situation, Sarah positioned herself as his intellectual equal, convinced him his wife didn't understand his ambitions. They planned the divorce for months, moved assets offshore, created documentation showing the marriage had been troubled for years. Jessica felt a surge of rage so powerful it was almost intoxicating. She wasn't just David's victim. She was Sarah's latest target in an ongoing criminal enterprise. Both previous victims were professional women, Rachel added. Both were primary breadwinners. Both thought they had perfect marriages until the day their husbands served them with divorce papers. But they didn't have what I have, Jessica said quietly. What's that? 12 years of David's documented planning. Evidence of their conspiracy, and a law firm that specializes in exposing exactly this kind of fraud. Rachel smiled grimly. No, they didn't. Which is why David Harper is about to become a cautionary tale instead of a success story. The rest of Friday was spent building the case. Marcus Webb's initial report on Sarah Mitchell revealed a pattern of calculated relationship destruction that went back nearly a decade. Her employment history showed a series of short-term positions at companies where her targets worked, suggesting she researched her victims carefully before making contact. Her social media presence was carefully curated to appeal to successful men feeling trapped in long-term relationships, independent, sophisticated, understanding of professional pressures. Janet Liu's financial analysis was even more damning. Over the past 2 years, since Sarah had apparently re-established contact with David, their joint accounts showed a pattern of expenditures that had nothing to do with Jessica's lifestyle or preferences. Expensive dinners at restaurants she'd never been to. Hotel charges during weekends when David had claimed to be at business conferences. Shopping sprees at stores that sold women's clothing in sizes that didn't match Jessica's measurements. The total was staggering. Over $30,000 in spending that had funded David's alternate life with Sarah, all of it carefully hidden through strategic timing and forged explanations on their monthly statements. But the most devastating evidence came from David's own documentation. His emails with Sarah and his text messages with Brad Morrison revealed not just the scope of their deception, but the calculated cruelty of it. They had specifically targeted Jessica's insecurities about work-life balance, her concerns about not being emotionally available enough, her fears that she wasn't the kind of wife a successful man needed. Every doubt she'd ever shared with David had been weaponized against her in their planning sessions. By the time the weekend arrived, Jessica had enough evidence to destroy David's career, his reputation, and his financial future. But evidence wasn't enough. She needed the perfect venue for the revelation, the right audience to ensure that David's humiliation was as complete and public as the deception he'd been practicing. And that's when she remembered their anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin. The dinner that had been canceled for a business emergency that turned out to be a celebration of her marriage's end. The restaurant where David had felt comfortable enough to mock their relationship in front of his parents and the woman he really loved. She picked up her phone and dialed the restaurant's private events coordinator. Sunday evening found her exactly where she'd been 2 weeks ago, standing in front of their bedroom mirror, wearing a black dress, preparing for dinner at Le Bernardin. But this time, everything was different. This time, she knew exactly who she was dealing with, and she had a plan that would ensure David Harper never underestimated another woman for the rest of his life. David had been trying to reach her all weekend, presumably having received the boxes of belongings at his office and realized that his carefully managed situation was spiraling out of control. His messages had escalated from confused to concerned to panicked to angry. "Jess, someone delivered boxes to my office with our personal stuff. What's going on? Jessica, please call me back. I'm worried about you. Why aren't you answering? Did something happen? This isn't funny anymore. We need to talk. I'm coming home." But he hadn't come home, because David Harper was at his core a coward who only felt brave when he controlled the narrative. The moment his carefully constructed story began to crack, he retreated to safer ground. She, however, was about to drag him back into the open. The call came at 6:30 p.m. "Jess? Jesus, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all weekend." "I know," she said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "I'm sorry. I've been dealing with some work issues. The Morrison account crisis at your company got me thinking about some similar problems we're having with client management." It was a carefully crafted lie designed to play into David's assumption that she was too absorbed in work to pay attention to their personal life. Work issues. His relief was palpable. David's world made sense again. His convenient business arrangement was just busy making more money while he planned their mutual future apart. What kind of problems? The kind that require bringing in multiple partners to address systemic issues, she said, allowing a note of exhaustion to creep into her voice. "Listen, can you meet me for dinner tonight? I could really use someone to talk to who understands business strategy." "Of course, sweetheart. Where do you want to go?" "Le Bernardin," she said, savoring the way his breathing hitched on the other end. "I managed to get us a table for 8 o'clock. I know it's our anniversary restaurant, but I thought it might be nice to talk somewhere that represents the strong foundation we've built together." There was a long pause. She could practically hear the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how to handle this unexpected complication. He was supposed to be maintaining distance, preparing for the next phase of his strategy. But he also couldn't risk alienating his primary source of financial security when he was so close to executing his exit plan. 8 o'clock sounds perfect, he said finally. I've missed you this week, Jess. I've missed you too, she lied smoothly. Oh, and David, wear that navy suit I bought you for your promotion. The one that makes you look like the successful executive you've become. I will, he promised, and she could hear the smile in his voice. He had no idea he was dressing for his own execution. Her next call was to Rachel. We're on for tonight. He'll be at Le Bernardin at 8 o'clock. Perfect, Rachel said. The private dining room is reserved. All the guests have been contacted, and Marcus has the surveillance equipment ready. This is going to be beautiful, Jessica. Justice served with a side of public accountability. What about the evidence presentation? Janet finished the financial analysis this afternoon. We have everything. The hidden spending, the asset manipulation attempts, the documented proof of their conspiracy. It's all organized in a presentation that would hold up in federal court. Her final call was to her own parents, Robert and Patricia Sterling, both retired attorneys who had built their own firm before Jessica was born. Mom, Dad, I need you to trust me and come to dinner tonight. Le Bernardin, 8 p.m. Private dining room. It's important. Sweetheart, her mother said, her voice immediately concerned. Is everything all right? It will be after tonight, Jessica said. Just promise me you'll come. And dress well, there will be colleagues from the firm there. We'll be there, her father said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that his daughter didn't make requests like this lightly. As she finished her preparations, Jessica felt a cold smile spread across her lips. David had thought he was so clever, so charming, so untouchable. He had no idea that his business arrangement had spent the weekend building a case that would destroy not just him, but the entire network of people who had helped him plan her humiliation. Le Bernardin looked exactly the same as it had 2 weeks ago when her world had collapsed. Same warm lighting, same intimate atmosphere, same couples sharing romantic dinners and whispered promises. But she felt like a completely different person walking through those doors. David was already in the private dining room, looking nervous and checking his phone every few seconds. He stood when he saw her approaching, his face lighting up with that charming smile that had once made her heart skip beats. Now it just looked like what it had always been, a mask hiding the predator underneath. Jess, he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. You look incredible. Thank you, she said, noting that the room was still empty except for them. The other guests would arrive precisely on schedule, just as she had planned. You look very handsome yourself. That suit is perfect on you. His smile flickered slightly as he glanced around the empty room. I thought you said this was about work issues. Are we expecting other people? We are, she said, settling into her chair at the head of the table. I hope you don't mind, but I've invited a few people who I think can help us work through the problems I've been dealing with. What kind of problems exactly? David asked, and she could hear the first note of genuine concern in his voice. Strategic problems, she said, opening the folder she'd brought with her. Issues involving business partnerships, asset management, and long-term planning. I thought it might be helpful to get input from people with experience in complex negotiations. The first guests arrived at 8:15, her parents, looking elegant and slightly confused, but willing to trust their daughter's judgment. David stood to greet them, his professional charm clicking into place automatically. Robert, Patricia, how wonderful to see you. Hello, David, her father said, his voice carefully neutral. He'd never been as impressed with David's charm as her mother had been. Jessica said you were having some business discussions that required family input. Something like that, Jessica said, gesturing for everyone to sit. We're waiting for a few more people. The next arrival was Rachel Morrison, looking like she'd stepped out of a legal thriller, beautiful, dangerous, and absolutely lethal in cross-examination. David's expression shifted slightly as he recognized her. Rachel, what a surprise. Hello, David, Rachel said with a smile that never reached her eyes. Jessica asked me to join you tonight to discuss some legal strategies. Then came Marcus Webb and Janet Liu, followed by Jessica's senior partners from the firm, and finally, the piece de resistance, David's own parents, Margie and Robert Harper, looking confused but pleased to have been included in what they'd been told was a celebration of David and Jessica's anniversary. As the last guests took their seats around the table, Jessica could see David's growing panic. This wasn't the intimate work discussion he'd been expecting. This was something else entirely, something that felt increasingly like a trap closing around him. "Now that everyone's here," Jessica said, standing and moving to the head of the table where a projection screen had been discreetly set up. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. David and I are celebrating an important milestone, our 12th wedding anniversary, and I thought it was important to have our families and closest professional associates with us as we discuss the future of our partnership." David's face had gone completely white. "Jess, what is this?" "This," she said, clicking a remote that brought the screen to life, "is a comprehensive analysis of our marriage as both a personal relationship and a business arrangement." The first slide appeared, a title page reading, "Harper versus Harper, a case study in matrimonial fraud and conspiracy." The silence in the room was absolute. David stared at the screen with the expression of a man watching his own execution, while their guests looked between him and Jessica with growing understanding and horror. "Over the past 12 years," Jessica continued, her voice steady and professional, "I've documented what I believe to be a loving marriage between equal partners. However, recent evidence has revealed that one party in this arrangement has been operating under significantly different terms than the other." She clicked to the next slide, financial records showing the $30,000 in unauthorized spending over the past 2 years. "David, would you like to explain to our guests what these expenditures represent?" David opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in their 12-year marriage, he was speechless. "I can explain them," Jessica said. "These represent the funding of a parallel relationship that has been maintained through systematic deception and financial fraud." She clicked again, screenshots of David's emails with Sarah Mitchell, his text messages with Brad Morrison, his documentation of their exit strategy. Margie Harper gasped audibly as she read her son's words, her hand covering her mouth in horror. "David," she whispered, "what is this?" "The evidence shows," Jessica continued relentlessly, "that our marriage has been characterized by one party as a business arrangement while the other party operated under the assumption that it was a loving partnership. Furthermore, the evidence reveals an ongoing conspiracy to maximize one party's financial position while minimizing the other's legal protections." She clicked through slide after slide of devastating evidence. Sarah Mitchell's history of targeting married men, David's systematic asset hiding attempts, his coordination with divorce attorney Brad Morrison to plan her financial destruction, his mockery of her love and devotion to their marriage. By the time she reached the final slides, several people in the room were crying. Her mother, his mother, even Marcus Webb, who had seen the worst of human nature in his decades as an investigator. "The question before us tonight," Jessica said, turning to face David directly, "is what consequences should follow when someone spends 12 years systematically defrauding their spouse while planning their emotional and financial destruction." David was shaking now. He looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, a sympathetic face, someone who might still believe his version of events. But there was nothing. His parents were staring at him with disgust and disappointment. Her parents looked ready to call the police. The attorneys in the room were already calculating the legal ramifications. "Jess, please," he said, his voice breaking. "Let me explain." "Explain what, David?" "How you told Sarah Mitchell that our marriage was never real while telling me you loved me. How you spent 2 years planning my financial destruction while I supported your career advancement. How you convinced your parents that I was just a business arrangement while I treated them like family for over a decade." "It's not what it looks like," he said weakly. "Then what does it look like?" she asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a man who spent 12 years committing matrimonial fraud while his wife funded his lifestyle and his affair." The word affair hung in the air like an accusation. Margie Harper began sobbing quietly, her husband's arm around her shoulders. They had loved Jessica like a daughter, had supported their marriage, had believed they were celebrating their son's happiness while he was actually planning to destroy the woman they considered family. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jessica said, clicking to her final slide, "I present to you the dissolution of Harper versus Harper, not through mutual agreement or irreconcilable differences, but through documented fraud, conspiracy, and systematic emotional abuse." The final slide showed the legal papers that Rachel Morrison had prepared, divorce proceedings, asset protection orders, and criminal referrals for financial fraud. David stared at the screen, his face a mask of complete devastation. His carefully planned exit strategy had become his public destruction. His business arrangement had outmaneuvered him at every turn, using his own weapons against him with surgical precision. The filing will be submitted tomorrow morning, Jessica continued. All joint assets have been frozen pending investigation. Mr. Morrison's law license is under review by the Bar Association for his role in planning matrimonial fraud. And Miss Mitchell is currently being investigated by law enforcement agencies in 3 states for her pattern of targeting married couples. She closed the presentation and looked around the room at the faces of people who had been part of her life for over a decade. I want to thank you all for being here tonight to witness the end of what I thought was love, but has been revealed to be the longest con game of my life. David stood up suddenly, his chair falling backward. You can't do this to me, he said, his voice desperate and angry. We can work this out. We can negotiate. The time for negotiation ended 2 weeks ago when you called me a business arrangement in front of the woman you really love, Jessica said calmly. This is simply the bill coming due. Security personnel, arranged discreetly by Marcus Webb, appeared at the room's entrances as David looked wildly around for an escape route. But there was nowhere to run, no charm that could work, no lie that could explain away 12 years of documented deception. His parents were crying. Her parents were furious. The attorneys in the room were already discussing the criminal implications of his actions. The cameras are rolling, by the way, Jessica mentioned casually. Channel 7 is doing a follow-up story on matrimonial fraud in high-income households. You're going to be famous, David. Just not in the way you always imagined. That broke him. The last vestige of his composure crumbled, and he collapsed back into his chair like a man whose entire world had just ended. Why, he whispered. Why are you doing this to me? She studied his face for a moment. This man who had stolen 12 years of her life and convinced her that her love was nothing more than a convenient business arrangement. Even now, facing complete ruin, he couldn't understand what he'd done wrong. In his mind, he was still the victim, persecuted for the crime of being too smart for his naive wife. Because you made me believe I was just a business arrangement, she said simply. Because you made me question my worth, my capacity for love, my understanding of what marriage should be. Because you took something beautiful, my willingness to build a life with someone, and turned it into a weakness to be exploited. She gathered her folders, her evidence, her documentation of 12 years of systematic fraud. And because someone needs to make sure you never do this to anyone else, ever again. She walked toward the room's exit, leaving David sitting at the table with the evidence of his crimes projected on the screen behind him like a monument to his own destruction. She didn't look back, but she could hear him calling her name, his voice breaking with panic and desperation. The aftermath was swift and devastating. David's arrest made the front page of the New York Times business section. His marketing firm terminated his employment immediately. His promotion was rescinded, his company car repossessed, his professional reputation destroyed beyond recovery. Sarah Mitchell was arrested in her apartment the following morning, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and racketeering in connection with her multi-state operation targeting married couples. Her carefully constructed new life collapsed as completely as David's had, her employer terminating her, her lease canceled, her assets frozen pending investigation. Brad Morrison's involvement in planning matrimonial fraud resulted in his suspension from the Bar Association and a criminal investigation that would ultimately end his legal career. The ripple effects extended through David's entire network of enablers and co-conspirators. But the most satisfying consequence came from an unexpected source. Within a week of the story breaking, Jessica received calls from dozens of women across the country, wives who had experienced similar patterns of behavior, who had questioned their own sanity when their husbands' actions didn't match their words, who had been isolated and manipulated into believing they were the problem in their marriages. Mrs. Harper, the voice belonged to a woman named Linda Chun, calling from San Francisco. I saw your story in the news. I wanted to thank you for having the courage to expose what these men do to us. What do you mean? Jessica asked. My husband spent 8 years telling me our marriage was just a practical arrangement while maintaining relationships with multiple other women. He convinced me I was too focused on my career to be a real wife, that I should be grateful he stayed with me despite my limitations. The conversation continued for an hour, Linda sharing details of psychological manipulation and financial control that mirrored Jessica's experience with David. By the time they hung up, something had shifted inside Jessica. The shame she'd been carrying, the sense that she'd been uniquely foolish, had begun to dissolve. She wasn't alone in this. She wasn't the only intelligent, successful woman who had fallen victim to this kind of systematic manipulation. Over the following weeks, more women came forward. Corporate executives, doctors, attorneys, professors, all of them professional women who had been targeted by men who viewed marriage as a business transaction rather than an emotional partnership. Each conversation, each shared story, each moment of mutual support helped heal something that David had broken inside her. The legal proceedings moved quickly. David's assets were successfully recovered, his attempts to hide money exposed and reversed. The house in Westchester remained hers, along with the majority of their joint financial holdings. But more importantly, the case became a landmark in matrimonial law, establishing new precedents for prosecuting systematic emotional and financial abuse within marriage. 6 months later, Jessica stood in her new office at Sterling, Morrison & Associates, the boutique firm she'd founded with Rachel Morrison, specializing in complex divorce cases involving high-asset couples and financial fraud. The walls were lined with case files, each one representing another victim of matrimonial deception, another opportunity to seek justice for people who had been told their love was worthless. Her personal life had undergone its own transformation. She was dating again, carefully, wisely, but with hope. She had learned to recognize the difference between someone who valued her strength and someone who sought to exploit it. The work was challenging, often heartbreaking, but always meaningful. Every case they won, every predator they exposed, every victim they helped felt like a small victory over the cynicism and manipulation that had once nearly destroyed her faith in love itself. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made her pause. David Harper parole review. She opened the message with steady fingers. David was serving a 7-year sentence for fraud and conspiracy. The parole board would be reviewing his case next month, and as a victim, she had the right to provide testimony about the ongoing impact of his crimes. She stared at the email for a long time, memories flooding back of that night at Le Bernardin, of the trial where David had finally been forced to face the consequences of his actions, of the years of healing that had followed. 3 years had passed, but the lessons he'd taught her still influenced every decision she made about trust, love, and the difference between partnership and predation. She picked up her phone and called the prosecutor handling David's case. District Attorney Morrison, it's Jessica Harper. I just received notification about David's parole review. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking that David Harper served his time according to the law. And if the parole board believes he's been rehabilitated, then that's their decision to make based on evidence and professional assessment. You're not going to oppose the parole? She considered the question carefully. Part of her wanted to keep David locked away forever, to ensure that he could never manipulate another woman the way he'd manipulated her. But a larger part of her recognized that her healing couldn't depend on his continued imprisonment. I'm going to attend the hearing, she said finally. I'm going to tell the board about the impact of his crimes, about the work we've done to help other victims, about the importance of monitoring repeat offenders. But I'm not going to let fear of David Harper control my decisions anymore. That's very wise of you, Jessica. It's taken me 3 years to get here, she admitted. But I think I'm finally ready to close this chapter completely. After she hung up, she sat in her office for a while, watching the city skyline and thinking about cycles of pain and healing, about justice and forgiveness, about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. David Harper had tried to reduce her to nothing more than a business arrangement, had made her believe she was incapable of inspiring real love. But in fighting back against him, in refusing to be silenced or diminished, she had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed. She had learned that she was brave enough to seek justice, smart enough to outmaneuver professional manipulators, and strong enough to rebuild her life on her own terms. She had learned that her capacity for love was a gift, not a weakness, and that her willingness to build something lasting with another person was something to be treasured, not exploited. Most importantly, she had learned that her worth wasn't determined by someone else's treatment of her, but by her own actions, her own choices, her own commitment to using her experiences to protect others from similar harm. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Sterling, Morrison and Associates, this is Jessica. Mrs. Harper. The voice was young, scared, barely above a whisper. My name is Caroline. I saw the documentary about your case. I think my husband might be doing something similar to what David did to you. Jessica felt her heart clench with familiar pain and determination. Another victim, another woman who had discovered that her love story was actually a crime story. Another opportunity to help someone fight back. Caroline, she said, her voice gentle but strong. You've come to the right place. Tell me what's been happening. As she listened to Caroline's story, the same patterns, the same lies, the same systematic exploitation disguised as marriage. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, sitting in her Westchester home surrounded by David's belongings, believing that her devotion had made her pathetic. She had been wrong about so many things back then. Wrong about love, wrong about trust, wrong about her own worth. But she had been right about one thing. Revenge was indeed a dish best served cold. Her revenge against David Harper hadn't been the public humiliation, the criminal conviction, or the prison sentence. Those were justice, consequences for his crimes that any victim deserved to see. Her real revenge had been refusing to let his cruelty define her. It had been building a life and a career dedicated to helping other women fight back. It had been turning her pain into purpose, her vulnerability into strength, her broken heart into a force for good in the world. David Harper had tried to destroy her, to reduce her to nothing more than a business arrangement to be managed and discarded. Instead, he had created his own worst nightmare, a woman who was stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And that woman was just getting started. Caroline, she said, pulling out a fresh legal pad and uncapping her pen. Let's start from the beginning. And don't worry, we're going to make sure this man never hurts you or anyone else again. Outside her window, the sun was setting over Manhattan, casting golden light across the city where she'd rebuilt her life from the ashes of David's deception. It was going to be a beautiful evening, a perfect evening for justice. The reckoning had begun, and it would continue as long as there were women who needed someone to believe their stories, validate their experiences, and help them fight back against the men who saw love as nothing more than a business transaction to be manipulated for personal gain. Jessica Harper had learned the hard way that not all partnerships were built on equal terms, that not all marriages were based on mutual respect, and that not all love stories had happy endings. But she had also learned that strength could be born from betrayal, that wisdom could grow from pain, and that the most powerful revenge against those who try to destroy you is simply refusing to stay destroyed.